Good morning, friends. This is Marcus Mack Ellison welcoming you to another Straight Talk, where we examine the issues with clarity, test them against unchanging truth, and leave room for real-world application. We do not chase trends here. We chase what holds up under scrutiny. Today's focus comes straight from recent events in New York City. The newly elected mayor, Zohran Mamdani, a self-described democratic socialist, has presented his preliminary budget plan for the city. He confronts a projected shortfall approaching $5.4 billion over the next 2 fiscal years. His primary solution remains direct and unapologetic: secure state approval from Governor Kathy Hochul and the Albany legislature to impose higher income taxes on the wealthiest residents and elevated corporate rates on the most profitable businesses. He presents this approach as both the fairest course and the most durable one, repeatedly insisting that the burden of closing the gap must never shift onto the shoulders of working-class and middle-class families. He has spoken with consistency on this point. In his budget address and in subsequent public remarks, he underscores that the city's wealthiest individuals and corporations should bear more responsibility, precisely because New York already ranks as the most expensive place to live in the nation. He notes that roughly 1.6% of earners, those making over $500,000 annually, currently shoulder 49% of the personal income tax burden. He poses the question plainly: at what point is enough truly enough? That remains his preferred path forward. Yet here is where the conversation turns sobering. Should the state legislature and governor decline to authorize those targeted increases, and indications suggest Albany may indeed hold firm, Mayor Mamdani has stated unequivocally that the city would then be compelled to pursue a second, far more widespread path. That alternative relies on the revenue levers fully under municipal control: significant property tax increases coupled with draws from reserves. He has specifically floated a 9.5% hike in the property tax rate as the mechanism of last resort. This single adjustment would impact approximately 3 million single-family homes, co-ops, and condominiums, in addition to more than 100,000 commercial properties throughout the 5 boroughs. My friends, pause with me and consider the practical effect. Property taxes do not land exclusively on billionaires residing in penthouse suites. They strike ordinary homeowners, public school teachers who deferred dreams and saved diligently to purchase a modest row house in Queens, nurses balancing night shifts and family life in Brooklyn apartments they finally own, small business proprietors running bodegas, laundromats, or corner delis out of buildings they acquired through years of sacrifice, retired couples subsisting on pensions and Social Security in the very neighborhoods where they raised their children. When that tax rate climbs, the expense does not remain isolated. Landlords incorporate the higher costs into rent increases. Commercial owners pass them forward through elevated lease rates. The consequences flow outward: higher living expenses for tenants, increased prices for consumers, tighter margins for employers. A policy advertised as holding the affluent accountable ultimately requires far broader participation when the initial plan encounters resistance. This scenario is not speculative. The mayor has described the property tax increase as painful, as a genuine last resort, yet he has also framed it as unavoidable absent state-level cooperation. Meanwhile, the city's budget has expanded dramatically, by billions of dollars in recent cycles. Yet the prevailing response sidesteps rigorous examination of spending discipline, potential privatization of non-essential services, or meaningful structural reforms. The default instead becomes a sweeping levy that disproportionately pressures those who have practiced faithful stewardship in their personal finances. And let us speak plainly for a moment. This is precisely what many promoted before the election. This is what was celebrated on the campaign trail as bold and equitable. This is what was voted for at the ballot box. And now this is what has landed on doorsteps across the city. Conservatives have offered the same measured warning for generations. When public policy rests on class division rhetoric and perpetual spending growth without corresponding restraint, the eventual reckoning seldom confines itself to the wealthy alone. The bill arrives, and it arrives addressed to far more households than the original sales pitch suggested. We have witnessed this sequence before, repeatedly. In cities like Baltimore, where decades of similar fiscal and governance approaches have yielded persistent decline. In states like California, where high-tax, high-regulation environments have driven businesses and residents to seek refuge elsewhere. And closer to home, in New York City during the 1970s and 80s, when unchecked spending, rising crime, and fiscal near collapse transformed a world-class metropolis into a city many abandoned in despair. It required a conservative mayor, Rudy Giuliani, to implement disciplined leadership, practical reforms, and a restoration of order before the city could regain its vitality and once again thrive. My friends, the word says in Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 4, "By justice a king builds up the land, but he who exacts gifts tears it down." True leadership fortifies a community through consistent justice and equitable application of law, not through shifting burdens when preferred options prove unattainable. Justice never justifies pitting neighbor against neighbor in a manner that ultimately penalizes those who have labored responsibly to secure stability for their households. The word also says in Romans chapter 13 and verse 7, "Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed." Scripture affirms the proper function of civil authority in collecting what is necessary for ordered society. Taxation, rightly administered, is not condemned. Yet when commitments promise targeted relief for some, while quietly preparing to impose broader extraction through alternative channels, they strain against the biblical call to honest and transparent stewardship. And consider 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. "If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat." This establishes the dignity of labor and the expectation of personal responsibility. When public systems erode the incentives for diligence by diminishing the fruits of saving, homeownership, and prudent provision, they contravene the scriptural principle of sowing and reaping, as Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7 declares. "Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap." Consider a representative New York family in greater detail. They have foregone family vacations, accepted overtime whenever available, and adhered to strict budgets for years in order to close on a modest home. They meet their mortgage obligations faithfully, maintain the property with care, tithe consistently to their local church, and instill in their children the same values of hard work and integrity. Then arrives the 9.5% property tax increase, not triggered by any sudden windfall in their income, but by municipal expenditures that exceeded revenues while the promised wealthier targeted levy remained blocked. Monthly housing costs rise noticeably. Margin for discretionary spending evaporates. Contributions to ministry or charity must be scaled back. Funds earmarked for a child's education or an emergency fund diminish. These are not theoretical hardships. They represent tangible pressure on flesh and blood households striving to honor God in their daily stewardship. Kevin O'Leary expressed the mounting exasperation succinctly. He described the proposal as beyond insane, reminding listeners that New York already claims the distinction of highest taxed major jurisdiction in the United States. He forecasted accelerated exodus, families and businesses migrating to lower tax states such as Florida and Texas, and quipped that he might soon begin distributing real estate relocation awards to those departing. The trend is already measurable. When policy signals that achievement will be penalized and fiscal shortfalls socialized across the board, productive citizens depart. The tax base contracts further. The spiral intensifies. This leads us to an unmistakable conclusion. Slogans promising to tax the rich resonate strongly in isolation. They garner favorable polls and project moral urgency in select quarters. But when implementation authority is withheld and the fallback becomes a near 10% assessment on residential and commercial property, the original assurance exposes its fragility. What is advanced as justice for the broader population frequently translates into an amplified burden on that same population when the narrow targets prove elusive. What then is the Monday morning response for us? First, cultivate the habit of probing beyond surface rhetoric. When any leader declares that the wealthy must contribute more, follow up immediately. And if that avenue closes, who ultimately bears the cost? Second, esteem stewardship in the civic realm as earnestly as in the personal. Pray earnestly for leaders who construct with genuine justice rather than dismantle through expedient but unsustainable measures. Third, embody responsibility within your own jurisdiction. Manage resources with wisdom. Advocate for policies that affirm diligence rather than discourage it, and engage public discourse with informed, gracious persistence. What then is the Monday morning response for us? First, cultivate the habit of probing beyond surface rhetoric. When any leader declares that the wealthy must contribute more, follow up immediately. And if that avenue closes, who ultimately bears the cost? Second, esteem stewardship in the civic realm as earnestly as in the personal. Pray earnestly for leaders who construct with genuine justice rather than dismantle through expedient but unsustainable measures. Third, embody responsibility within your own jurisdiction. Manage resources with wisdom, advocate for policies that affirm diligence rather than discourage it, and engage public discourse with informed, gracious persistence. Until next time, this is Marcus Mack Ellison. Be calm, be correct, and keep testing everything against what lasts.